Hey, Branson. Hey,
Hello.
Branson.
Hey, how you doing, sir?
Okay, how are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good.
All right.
We did our first event this weekend, yesterday in Wilson.
How'd it go?
It was pretty good. We had about 200, 300 people show up. Kind of
Wow.
fluctuated, and we had a lot of kids. We fed all the kids. We had vendors and health care specialists, a
Wow.
DJ. We were on Lake Toussaint in Wilson, North Carolina.
Oh, I never heard of that. Is that a nice place?
Yeah,
Huh. Very cool. I don't know Wilson very well, I must admit.
yeah. Wilson is it's a weird place. It has a lot of small businesses
Really? Why is that, do you think?
because it's right off 95.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Um,
I
I'm
mean,
starting.
I've been to the Whirligig Park.
Mm, I
So,
think Asset Park is down there in Wilson also.
okay.
I think that's where some kids died from doing acid, and the parents like made it into this psychedelic kind of park.
How
And a lot of
weird.
people go, yeah, people go down there to look at it. They take their children, try to keep them off drugs.
I got you. Ah, hard to believe that they would spend money doing something like that. Hey, Jason, how are you?
Good. How about you, Dennis?
All right. Did you have a good weekend?
Yeah, it was good.
All right.
How about you?
Yeah, not bad. Not bad at all. Um, although I'm ready for a little bit cooler weather. I don't know about you guys, but it's been hot.
I got dehydrated yesterday at that event.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What happened? Did you pass out?
No, no, no. I started just my legs started cramping real bad, and I just could. I've been dehydrated before, and I could feel my body getting there. So I went and got something to drink, Gatorade, and kind of went somewhere cool.
Yeah.
When
Yeah, it's
when I was in college, I was a security guard at an amusement park, and the park offered free soda. So there was these Pepsi dispensers all over the park. You get during the like July and August, man, we had so many people falling out because they would just drink soda all day and never drink any water.
oh
Um,
yeah,
that was nuts.
too much sugar. All right. Well, today we're gonna take a look at there's a competitor to Techstars, and they're called Y Combinator. Some of you may have heard about them. Y Combinator and Techstar are the two biggest accelerators for startups. So we've got a presentation today about how to launch and relaunch and relaunch. Don't think of a launch as a one-time thing. So hopefully you all will find this interesting. So let me tee it up here. Okay, go. Sure we can see it.
I'm Kim Yalik. I'm a partner at Y Combinator. And one of the things I help founders do a lot is prepare to launch. That is what I'm going to talk to you about today. So I want to change the way that you think about launching. So most people think about launching as something that you get one shot at. So for example, I just talked to a team that's been preparing to launch for 6 months. They were lovingly trying to get every pixel perfect on their product before they shared it with everyone. And now they are stressing over every line on their landing page. And, they're trying to line up everything right with timing. But if you're like most startups, you will launch something and no one will care. And if it took you 6 months to get there, your startup is probably going to be dead before you get another chance to launch. So in the same sort of spirit as always be shipping, I want you to think about launching as something you can continually do. I want to destroy the idea that launching is just this one moment in time, because assuming you do well and assuming you ship new products and new features, you are never going to be not launching. So let's talk about all the ways that you can launch. Here are different opportunities to launch that we're going to go through today. I'll go through each of these except press launches. We have done a previous startups lecture on press launches, and I'll share a link to that and some resources, after this. But we'll go over most of these, and most of these things are things that you should be doing while you're in startup school. So let's talk about first why you want to continuously launch. So before you even have a fully functioning product, you get a chance to practice your pitch, and you can refine it. You can A/B test it and see how people actually respond to the idea. And then once you have an MVP or, a very early version of your product, launching through different channels will give you an opportunity to see how people will respond to that early version of the product. And then launching to different channels will help you determine whether you're even talking to the right users, because, you might launch on one channel and get no response. You'll launch on another channel and you'll get a huge response. And so that will help you identify whether, you're identifying the right user for what you're building. So let's talk about some of the types of launches that you can do while you're in startup school. And I'm excited to hear that, 1,000 of you have launched so far since the start of startup school. That's incredible. So I clicked on 10 random startup school companies from founders who'd posted on the forum, and only about half had landing pages. So this is what I call the silent launch. And you do not need anything fancy for this. All you need is a domain name, your company name, a short description, a contact, and a call to action. So for example, this is a random startup school company that I found from a founder who'd posted on the forum. Their company is Zinc. They have, a domain name, they have their company name, they have their, short one-line pitch, a short description, and their call to action, which is get in touch. The call to action can be something like, subscribe to our newsletter or subscribe to hear more when we launch. Product Hunt, for example, has an actual product for pre-launch companies called Ship. And it's a way to collect potential, interest from potential users. So for example, this is something called Designer School. And it has a quick intro from the founders, a short description of what the company does, and the call to action, which is subscribe. So, you can go on Product Hunt and set up one of these pages. But of course, you can also build your own landing page incredibly quickly and easily. And this should be something, if you don't have one yet, that you do this weekend. So the next thing is the friends and family launch. So if you're at idea stage, you can test out your short pitch on family and friends and see how they respond. And once you have an MVP, do a friends and family launch as quickly as possible. So in its earliest days, Reddit was shared just among the founders of their batch at YC. There were only 8 companies. It was a really small community. I used the Wayback Machine to actually see what Reddit looked like in its earliest days. It hasn't changed that much. But if you look closely, this is actually before they called upvotes. They were calling it boosts. This is like 2005, I think July. So that's how they got their very first users, just sharing it among their community of founders. And so, what I recommend you do is share the product with your friends and family, watch them use it, sit down next to them and ask for feedback. But don't stay in this phase for too long, because your friends and family might not be the exact right ideal user for your product or what you're building. And so sometimes their feedback isn't quite as helpful as a real user's is. So for example, if Alexis and Steve had shared this with their parents, their parents might have been like, what the hell is this? So you get out of that, family and friend circuit as fast as you can. And so the next move would be to launch to strangers. So one of my favorite examples of a YC company launching to strangers is the company Lug. So Lug is an app that lets you call movers and delivery people on demand. So even before Lug had built a fully functioning app or product, they would rent a truck and they would go drive to IKEA and they would sit outside of IKEA. So they would watch shoppers and they'd look for people who were having a particularly difficult time tying stuff to the top of their cars. And they'd run up to those customers and they'd say like, hey, instead of trying to tie this, mattress on top of your car, wouldn't it be cool if you could just push a button and someone with a truck would come and help do this for you? And, the customers would be like sweating and they'd be like, yes, that's exactly what I need at this moment. And, they'd download the app. They'd click the lug button and then the founder would run back to the parking lot, drive up in his truck, and then the customer would be like, oh my God, it's you. And they were like, yeah, so it was a real hustle at the beginning. Like none of this was working on the back end, but it really confirmed for them that this was a hair on fire problem for their users and customers. And so they decided it makes sense for us to really build this out and spend time, on this product. So launching to strangers will help do that for you. It will help show you whether people are actually willing to download and pay for what it is you're building. Let's talk about online communities. This is actually one of my favorite ways to launch. I think you should plan a launch for every single community that you are part of. So when a company goes through Y Combinator, they have the option of launching on Bookface before they launch publicly. So Bookface is our internal platform at YC. It's like Facebook meets LinkedIn meets Quora. And there are currently over 4,000, other founders on Bookface. So it's a fairly low risk way to launch because it's not totally public, but there is enough of an audience there to get some feedback. And you're launching in front of, fairly friendly people who, want to see you succeed. And so they launch there. And what I think you guys are particularly lucky because you have Startup School and you have the Startup School forum, which about 40,000 founders are on. So if you have an early version of your product, there is literally no reason that you shouldn't be launching to the Startup School community in the next few weeks. And so, I also think that founders and other people making and building stuff, they give the best early product feedback. So you have thousands of other founders at your disposal. So I think that, that this, kind of gives you a leg up here. Here's a sort of extreme example of a company that successfully launched in online communities. So Magic is an on-demand personal assistant. When they started in Y Combinator in 2015, they were actually building a blood pressure monitoring app. So they were trying to get this blood pressure monitoring app to grow, and it wasn't growing as quickly as they were hoping. So they decided, let's test out another idea that we had. So they sent a link around to their friends and family, and it just looked like this. It basically said like, text this phone number and we'll make anything happen like magic. Like it was very, very basic. And one of their friends thought it was so cool that they shared it on Reddit and Hacker News. And basically overnight, like over the course of a weekend, 40,000 people signed up to use Magic. And so of course they were like, oh my God, this is crazy. And let's be honest, this is an extreme case and almost no one who launches on Reddit and Hacker News, is going to get 40,000 users overnight. But my point is it's definitely worth putting yourself out there, because, you might be one of those like extreme cases, but at the very least you'll get some early users and you'll get some great feedback. So many of the startups that go through YC launch on Hacker News and Product Hunt. And, we over time have looked at the stats of how well these launches convert. So, a TechCrunch launch versus a Product Hunt launch versus a Hacker News launch. And in terms of converting to users, they're starting to even out in terms of their impact and conversion for, whether it's, your signups or, converting to customers. So if you're launching in these communities and aren't active members of these communities yet, my suggestion is that you spend a little bit of time looking at the communities. You understand the rules, especially if you're posting to subreddits, right? They all sort of have their own, moderators have their own rules. Understand the best way to talk to these communities. And if it's a community that's known for being helpful, ask for advice, ask for feedback. If you're not part of these communities, I'd reach out to someone who is and ask them for advice. Ask them for the best way to launch because there are going to be tips for every community. And, for example, one company in this batch, was building something that he wanted to get more, women's perspectives on. And they're, 2 male founders. And one of the users of Alpha, which is a community for women in tech, said, hey, I'll post that to Alpha for you. And I'll tell you what kind of feedback they got. So I recommend connecting with someone in the community and asking them for help if you're not part of the community yourself. The biggest piece of advice I have for launching on online communities is write like you talk. Do not talk like a marketing robot. People hate that. So don't use marketing language or deep jargon. Talk like a human when you're addressing the community. So all you need in these, when you introduce yourself in these posts, introduce yourself, talk about what you're building, talk briefly about why you're doing it or how you came across the problem. People on Hacker News, for example, are super intellectually curious. So are there any interesting insights that you've learned from talking to potential users or your users? Is there anything surprising or delightful that you could share with the community? Because people love that. And they also want to ask you questions, but sometimes don't know exactly how or which questions they should ask you. So tee it up for them. Say, hey, I'm an expert in X, Y, and Z, and I'm happy to answer questions on these topics. Otherwise, you risk people going down all sorts of weird rabbit holes. And just make sure that you sort of are sharing this community, asking them for advice. Try to cut down as much of the jargon and marketing as possible out of these pitches. The request for access launch, the magic story that I shared with you actually reminded me of this other type of launch you can do. So when Magic launched, overnight they got 40,000 people signing up. And of course they couldn't serve 40,000 users immediately. So they launched a waitlist. And they also gave people ways to skip the line. So for example, if you tweeted about Magic, you'd get, to skip a few spots in the line. So you can build these viral elements into your launches that will help get people to spread the word for you. One of my current favorite examples of this request for access launch is Superhuman. So Superhuman is building a better email experience. So you can go to their site here and request access. And you can also ask a current user to refer you, and then that'll help you skip the line. So in the signature of all emails that are sent by Superhuman users is a little tag that says sent by Superhuman. And so I'm a Superhuman user and I get a ton of emails. Like I'll send a ton out of my emails out to people, and I get a ton of emails asking me for referrals. So, people I email say, hey, how did you like Superhuman? Would you mind referring me to the product? So if you have a product that you can build this sort of viral element into, I highly recommend it. So we don't have a huge amount of time because obviously social media and launching to bloggers is this huge and long and well-covered topic. But I wanted to skim them briefly and give you an example of a company that we worked with that did it very well. As most of you know, launching to popular blogs that cover your industry or trade can be incredibly powerful. So Joy is a free wedding website builder, and they were one of the fastest growing companies in their batch. And a lot of their early growth, like an alarming amount of their really early growth, was due to being placed on a number of lists like this. They essentially Googled, they looked at, SEO, and they Googled, best wedding website builders and figured out who was coming up on, the first couple pages of results on Google. And they reached out to all those bloggers and, they said, hey, we have this new product. We think your community would love it. Would you be willing to add us to this list? And they said that they reached out and basically did a drip campaign to over 50 bloggers and only got responses from 4. But those 4 responses made a huge impact for their early growth. So one note that I want you to keep in mind is that some blogger and influencer opportunities are pay to play. And Joy did not pay early on, and I do not want you paying early on either. If folks are asking you to pay, please find other or creative routes to get around this, because as early stage startups, you just don't have you don't have the money to do it. And so it is definitely possible to go this route without paying a ton of money. So figure out, routes around the expensive sort of sponsorship dollars. If you're a hardware or physical product, of course, you can do a pre-order campaign. Preparing for pre-order launch could honestly be a whole presentation of its own. But take a look at some successful campaigns and get a sense for how they built out their launch strategy. So for example, SheerTex was a company in YC that was making unbreakable sheer pantyhose. The founder, Catherine, made a great, really compelling video. She pitched press. She launched on Hacker News, where, Hacker News is probably, it's a very male audience. So we were curious how they would respond to something like sheer, unbreakable pantyhose, but they loved it. They thought it was very clever. They thought, that the technical piece behind it was really interesting. So would recommend, like any company, try to launch and see how different communities respond. She launched on Product Hunt. She asked her friends and family and batchmates and investors to help spread the word. And she had an incredibly successful campaign. And so, of course, there's the new feature or new product line launches. So two very different companies that do this incredibly well are Stripe and Glossier. So both companies are incredibly smart about how they launch new products. So Stripe has always been great from the very beginning. They've been really great at engaging the community. So every time they launch a product, so for example, when they launched Stripe Atlas, they launched it on Hacker News and the founders were in the thread talking to all, potential users and talking about the product and why they were launching it, the problems that they felt it was solving. They blogged about it. They spread the word on social media. They pitched press. And this is something that they do over and over again. If you look at Stripe's blog, if you look at Hacker News, you can kind of see the history. Since the beginning, they've been very great at sort of activating the community. Glossier, which is a beauty brand, is incredible at launching new product. And the way they think about it is actually very scientific. They release products on a very specific cadence at specific intervals. And for every product, they essentially hit every single launch button again and again. So community, social media, press, advertising. So each time this new product launches, which is basically like every 6 to 8 weeks, they have this cycle going. So there's a constant drumbeat about Glossier out in the world. One last note before we jump into questions is while you're in startup school, you should start to build your own communities. And you can do this even really pre-product. So there was one YC founder, Gadi Evron, who is founder of Symmetria, and he had a really particularly successful TechCrunch launch. A TechCrunch launch is a story about what they were doing, launched in TechCrunch, and I noticed that they had a ton of shares, a ton of engagement. So I asked him to share, how did you set this up? What did you do to share and spread the word about your launch? And he said that over the years, even before launching the product, he started to build his own email list. So every person he met that he discussed his startup with, even very loosely, he would add them to an email list, and they would get, sort of email updates about what he was working on a semi-regular, at semi-regular intervals. So when the TechCrunch article came out, he said he sent that email to the list full of all the people that he'd ever talked to, other startup founders, investors, friends, family, and asked for their help in spreading the news. And he said the response was significant. And he even saw VCs who hadn't invested in them sharing the story from their own personal Twitter accounts. And he said, you would be really surprised by who comes out of the woodwork to help when you ask for it. So I would recommend while you're in startup school, you have the opportunity to talk to so many people about what you're building and start and ask them, hey, can I add you to my update list? And over time, that you'll get that into the hundreds, maybe even thousands. So I would definitely recommend that you start doing that now. And so to sum up, I want you to stop thinking about launching as this one moment in time. I don't want you to spend all of startup school getting ready for this one big day, this one big launch day that you're trying to line up all these things for. This is something that is a continuous process that you can do over the course of the next couple months and into the life cycle of your company. If you didn't catch them the first time, these are all the opportunities that we went over. And I'm Kat. So if you ever have any questions, it's demo days coming up, so I might be slightly slower than usual to respond, but you can always reach out, Kat at Y Combinator, and I'm also on Twitter. Okay.
I get exhausted watching her. She's so animated. The point of this, I think, from my perspective, is there are so many markets out there. We tend to think, particularly if you have a physical location, you tend to have a good awareness of who your market is, where they're coming from, where they're located, and you're trying to bring them to your location, which is understandable. From a digital perspective, you may end up having customers in places you either never heard of or didn't know about. And she threw some things out there like Hacker News, Reddit, if you're familiar with, and of course the regular social media. And she had a whole list there of different things to do. But the whole point is really to reach out to the audiences that might be receptive to what you're doing. And I think you might be surprised at the response you get. This is one of the discoveries we had with the live streaming, was that people found they had customers in the most surprising places. Samantha might remember, we had a woman who was making freezer jam from, I think it's called 4 Points or 4 Oaks or something like that, a farm out, out in the rural area. And she was making this freezer jam, which apparently is jam that's not cooked in any way, as I understand it. And she ended up selling all kinds of jam in California. She normally went to her local farmer's market or had a few local stores carrying it, but she ended up building some customers in areas that she never would have guessed would be interested. So the point, I think, of this video to me is really think about all the different potential. This is an online thing, but all of the potential markets that might be interested in what you have. And, I think this concept of launching constantly, it's not a one-time thing. Like, if you have a physical store, you open that store and you're open, and that makes sense. But in the digital world, there are lots of submarkets that have never heard of you before. And so make some effort to find those audiences and getting your material together to talk to them. I think the idea of organizing a campaign, even if it's on email or social media, you want to tell the story of your product. And that could include live video from you. It could include graphics, a series of emails or a series of social media posts. This is all part of the process. When they talk about campaigns, that's what they're talking about. So, Samantha, do you have any thoughts on this whole subject?
I just feel like I constantly launch again and again for this. I did do a pre-launch for the hot sauce that I came out with to my retailers, which I thought was really good in order to get the waiting list. And I hadn't thought about that in terms of getting the sales and getting my retailers to pre-order things, which helped also with money, with cash flow, to pay for the orders. But yeah, that's why I'm sorry I haven't been able to show up as much as I'd like. But yeah, I feel like I'm constantly launching again and again and again.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to think about it. Jason, any comment? Jason's got an unusual situation. He's got quite a large physical plant, his restaurant, plus he has a seafood processing plant, but he's also working on selling stuff online. So Jason, any thoughts on what these people were talking about?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's there's seasonality to all the products that we have, so it's just a matter of basically product launching when we move into a fresh season. So, when we hit new species of fish or new shellfish or something like that, it's just highlighting that, and that just definitely got to be built into the marketing plan around trying to promote the live streaming.
Yeah, and I think the when you'll be shipping product to people, God knows where they'll be coming from, right? You could be shipping all over the place, so that makes sense.
Yeah, the online customers we have so far, I mean, they really have surprised me. I mean, I've shipped seafood to the coast on California. I've shipped it down. Like it's amazing. I thought I'd be mostly shipping inland, but I end up shipping to coastal regions more often than not, because people are those are, I guess, the people that have the tradition of eating seafood, but they're looking for something that's just not in their local markets.
Yeah, and they have money for the most part. So, anyone else want to jump in on this? Okay. Well, thank you all for coming today. I know it's short and sweet, but we have a whole bunch of resources for Y Combinator as well as Techstars. If there's, and it's most of it is, you can tell the topic, you can look it up and see what it is. So I'll provide a link. I've collected them. I haven't figured out how to get them all on our website yet, but I've got them stored in Dropbox. So I'll put the links in there so you can take a look and see what we have, to offer. So, well, thanks a lot, and we'll see you tomorrow and talk about goals.